So I was moved to do something about this situation. One day when I was watching Democracy Now! And I saw images of, I guess they were Tea Partiers, maybe that's an assumption on my part, but Americans screaming at children from Latin America as they were coming through the whole immigration process. And it's quite a gauntlet for an adult to go through. There's lots of fences and lots of people you don't know and lots of languages being spoken that you don't understand. So it's fairly daunting to go through that process, even if you're not running from a very violent situation in your country. So when I saw those images, I was deeply moved. In fact, I found myself in tears. And I found myself in tears every day when I thought about this situation. So I thought, well, I better do something about it, but I didn't know what. Mainstream media has described the situation as a crisis, an immigration crisis. Is it? They describe the immigrants as criminals. Are they? Compared to the number of refugees the rest of the world has already taken in, it really isn't a crisis at all. They say this increase is the result of coyotes telling people that U.S. immigration policy has changed and that they will be allowed to stay once they get here. That is only a very small snapshot of a very big problem with U.S. foreign policy. It is why Vets4Peace exists. It is also because incredible violence in their country, which is the direct result of U.S. foreign policy. I'm going to explain to you this evening why this is not an immigration crisis, but an increasingly bigger problem of refugees coming to this country, driven here by the violence and poor economies of their own countries. The crisis is not the number of people crossing our border, but how we are describing them and how we are responding to them once they get here. Immigrants come from all over the place. Notice the highest number of immigrants come from Asia and the Pacific. I was in high school when the second surge of immigrants from Asia came to this country. And I watched horrible behavior on the part of my classmates. I watched these children get surrounded, spit at, ignored. I had a Phi-Ed teacher who never even bothered to say their names. She didn't know whether they were in class or not. Our behavior was horrible. So as you can see from this World Bank chart, most of the refugees come from Asia and the Pacific, followed by the Middle East, Africa, and Europe. The Americas represents the smallest number of immigrants. So why are we talking about the immigrants crossing the border from Mexico? It's obviously not the biggest source of our immigration. Why are we talking about it so much? Why are we not talking about the Asian immigrants? This map shows refugees around the world. The green reflects the number of refugees each country has taken in, and the orange reflects the countries that they come from. The United States has taken in 264,800 refugees. Iraq, evil Iraq, has taken in 1,428,300. Most of these countries that have taken in more refugees than we have fewer resources than we have. Until recently, most of the immigrants crossing into this country from the south have come from Mexico. So throughout the 1800s, our southern border had all kinds of U.S. inspection stations that were monitoring immigration. Some got in, some got out, some did not get in. Due to a dramatic increase in the labor needs, partially because of the Industrial Revolution and partially because of World War I, we kind of let up our restrictions on immigration. A whole lot more Mexicans came into work. In 1929, we didn't need them anymore, so we deported them. Our attitudes have changed over the years, so has the latitude of our immigrants. In 1942, the Braceros program brought a bunch of immigrants again because we needed labor. We had a labor shortage because of another war. Braceros is Spanish for laborer. Our railroads were built by Mexicans, Chinese, Irish, and a host of other immigrants. But when they were finished, they, mostly Mexicans, were treated like garbage and summarily deported. Thanks for all your help. Don't let the puerta hit you in the posterior on the way out. Note the blatant racism. In 1954 with Operation Wetback, that's how we responded to the labor help that they provided us. Since they were no longer needed, they were deported. The government themselves called them wetbacks. In 1964, numerous assembly plants are built along the border to be near cheap labor. By 1968, as a result of the need for cheap labor, we had 58 million migrant workers, mostly from Mexico and other parts of Latin America. So over the years, lots and lots of legislation has been discussed. Some of it's been passed. None of it has made a difference. Immigration ebbs and flows according to the economies of the countries that they come from. Immigration ebbs and flows according to how serious we are at the border. Immigration ebbs and flows according to how much labor we need and what we're willing to pay for it. We're simply not willing to pay for it. So it's going to keep going up and down and up and down. Personally, this crisis has a lot more to do with Americans screaming at scared little children than it has to do with anybody taking anyone's job. By 1992, we had 3.4 million immigrants working along the border. They do more than just assemble things, harvest our vegetables, wash our dishes, do our landscaping, paint our houses, etc., etc. They're now taking care of our children, waiting tables, and doing a host of other service industry jobs that corporate America is not willing to pay for. By 1993, when the administration started discussing NAFTA, there was a lot of opposition to it. That opposition was depicted as a bunch of dirty hippies not knowing what they were talking about, similar to Occupy Wall Street. 1994, NAFTA was ratified by Bill Clinton. That same week, massive demonstrations in Mexico. The Zapatistas, of which I have a sticker right here, marched from San Cristobal in Chiapas in southern Mexico to Mexico City to make their voices heard. What the Zapatistas wanted is the same thing as the insurgents of El Salvador wanted: land for indigenous people, equitable distribution of wealth in their country, and the means to survive. Later that same year, the Mexico peso plummets. Talking heads and politicians credit Mexico's erratic economy and internal corruption for this devaluing of the peso. However, NAFTA also increases profits for Mexicans' elite. But wage gaps remain wide, not only between our country and their country, but between Mexican elite and the rest of Mexico, similar to the United States. Officials have reported 5,595 people have died attempting to enter the United States since 1994. This represents approximately 1/5 to 1/10 of the total number of deaths. Because when you die in the desert, your body deteriorates very quickly. So they often don't find many parts of you. And also because of all the rival gangs throughout the desert and along the trains that these people have to pass through, a lot of them are beaten, raped, and killed along the way by various gangs on their journey. It's a very arduous and frightening journey, and nobody makes it lightly. By 2006, McCain-Kennedy Comprehensive Immigration Reform Bill stalls in the most dysfunctional Congress in history. The bill called for amnesty guest worker programs with increased security. In 2008, Mexico's Congress voted to decriminalize immigration. Later that same year, the U.S. Operation Streamline spent $7 million and sent more than 60 prosecutors to the border to prosecute all kinds of smuggling and related crimes happening down there. Then in 2001, America freaks out. Our civil liberties were eroded with the Patriot Act, and border security just exploded. By 2003, the Department of Homeland Security was created, encompassing the Internal Immigration and Naturalization Service, the United States Department of Agriculture, and 40 other governmental agencies. The DHS is a behemoth of a government agency, full of bureaucracy, full of corruption. Now, immigrants spend, on average, they send about $10 billion back to their families every year. But how many is too many? Immigration here has surged and abated since, say, 1492, usually driven by economic and/or civil crises. By 2012, the refugee surge of children from El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras has now reached epidemic proportions. Currently, 60,000, mostly children, have arrived from those countries since last October. Many of these children have family who are already here. Some don't. What are these children here for? Why did they come? The one thing I do not see in the news very much at all is the fact that these children are being targeted by gangs. You think the streets of LA are rough? Try the streets of San Pedro in Honduras. This is 4 children who've been murdered by a gang because they didn't want to join the gang. How old does this little child look to you? 6? 7 years old? Imagine the parents in this audience. What the situation would have to be for you to send your children to another country alone. Why? Why is it happening? To understand the answer to that, you have to understand how the world economy works. And to understand how the world economy works, you need to understand about natural resources. The corporate code word for natural resources is American interests. And we defend American interests by any means necessary. Latin America is rich in a vast array of natural resources that the United States wants. Not just the United States, but I'm from the United States. It's been done with my tax dollars, so that's the country I'm going to focus on. Since the gap between rich and poor is very wide in these countries, various presidents have attempted to nationalize their resources, spread the country's wealth to the poor and the indigenous populations. Once a democratically elected leader tries to nationalize their natural resources, the United States sends economic hitmen to their countries. Since 1908, the United States has helped overthrow just about every democratically elected president in Latin America. I say just about because I didn't find, not because I found any countries that they didn't do this in, but because my father always told me, never speak in absolutes, because you'll always be wrong. When you hear people talking about illegal immigrants, ask yourself where they're from. Ask yourself why. Use the word refugee when it applies. Don't let people get away with calling these people immigrants. They're refugees. They're refugees of U.S. foreign policy. And there are more of them every single day. When it comes to understanding this issue, understand that CNN, Fox, NBC, CBS, the New York Times, and the Washington Post, and most of mainstream media have been relegated to propaganda machines. Any reporter who spews anything other than the company line is ostracized, harassed, or simply fired. If they're unfortunate enough to be in another country, when they're spewing this truth, they might simply be murdered. To help you with your own research, Chris has put the websites that I've used to compile this information for this presentation on the VFP website. Yes?
About 8 o'clock tonight.
Good. So I wanted to keep my comments relatively short because all I know about this is what I've read on the internet this past week and a little bit from what I've learned talking to people throughout Mexico and Guatemala. But if we really want to solve this problem, and it is a problem, because children are homeless. Children are sleeping in cold, overcrowded immigration facilities in Texas. They need better. They deserve better.